Hello to anyone watching this, welcome. And today I'm going to be talking about a graph that is wrong. And specifically, I wanted to choose my own personal graph and just a little bit of background on myself before I go into what's wrong with this graph that's in front of me. So, I generally am a very political person and I love politics, right? And I also like military. Now, I'm not the kind of person that's going to be in the military myself. I don't have the guts to do that. I don't have the strength and the fortitude a lot of people do. But I still really do like talking about military things. So, this graph in front of me talks about military budget. And we all know that the United States uses a lot of money for its military, right? In fact, the United States, by most available metrics, is the world's only true superpower after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. And specifically, this graph is created by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. So it's a reputable source. So it's not just some random person creating this graph. And it's supposedly supposed to show the military expenditures of the top 6 countries in the world. And this graph, looking at it, when you first might look at it, you might be like, oh, there's not that many issues here, right? And actually, as you can see, this is from 2020. At the end, I'll tell you what the numbers look like today because they're quite different. So when you look at this graph, it might look like China is getting a crazy leap ahead of the United States, which obviously in reality doesn't seem right? And that's because if you look at the fine print, next to the names of the countries, it either says left axis or in the United States, right axis. So the first mistake that they're doing here, and that's really bad about this graph, is that they're using a different scale for both sides. On the right side, it's using the scale of 400 billion to 1,000 billion, which is 1 trillion. And on the left, it's going from 0 billion to 300 billion. This is extremely misleading because it makes it look like China is using more money than the United States, which we know is factually incorrect. Really, the United States is using around 775 billion, while China is using around 275. The second issue we can see with this graph is there is an insane amount of crowding. Because of this weird scale that they did here, they have to push all of these together, and it looks extremely odd. So, how would I fix this? Well, what I would do is I would try to separate the graph a little bit more, and I wouldn't really show the top of the United States part. I would maybe let it go off in the distance and put a note or something so I could see these more clearly, because you can't really tell what's more, what's less, realistically, and you can't tell how much it really is. And I forgot to mention on the first one, what I would do to fix it is to use just a one-side scale. And I would probably, like I said, put the United States one all the way up above and put a note. The third issue that I see with this is there's no context. So military spending isn't just how much money you spend on military. Even though that is true, there's more factors to that go into it. For instance, a country like, I'm a Romanian, so I'm going to use my motherland of Romania. They don't have as much of a military budget. So you might be like, oh, they're more fiscally responsible, right? Because they don't have as much of a military budget as the United States. But that's incorrect because they have less of a GDP, less of a population. So we have to take that into account. The United States has the biggest GDP in the world at, I believe it's about 25 trillion a year GDP. And China is 5 times under that. So comparing the United States budget, which in this graph is around 775 billion, to the China one, which is 275 billion, is just disingenuous. So if I were to remake this chart again, I would specifically add a note of context somewhere, or I would add a paragraph next to the graph explaining a few things, because just doing a graph like this is disingenuous generally. The 2 reasons why they would possibly do this sort of thing is, first, to downplay the U.S. dominance in the military and try to make it look like China is really growing, right? Makes it look like that. And it also really gives energy to the global competition, and it makes it look like the United States is falling out of its grace as a world power. And it's giving our enemies energy. So, as a conclusion, this graph is extremely disingenuous, extremely wrong, and it really just tries to downplay the United States by having a weird double standard graph. And as I promised at the end, I will tell you the GDPs currently. This year, the United States has a GDP that was approved of $1.15 trillion. And China has a military budget that will be around 350 billion. So as you can see, since 2020, it's gone up, but still it doesn't change the fact that this graph is extremely, extremely disingenuous. Thank you for listening.